Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm Sean Murphy, your host. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University. I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. But the thing I love most about what I do is it often puts me in contact with very interesting people who I am always learning from and inspired by. Today is not only no exception. It's someone I've known for quite a while, but this is our first time on camera together. So for me, this is a special occasion, something I've been looking very forward to. It is my pal, Jordan Blum. Let me give him a proper introduction and then we'll jump in and you'll probably see right away why he and I have been simpatico on so many levels for so long. Jordan holds an MFA in fiction and teaches composition and creative writing at several colleges and universities. Beyond that, he's a former features editor at PopMatters and a past or present contributor to, among others, Grammy.com, Metal Injunction, Metal Sucks, Prog Magazine, Consequence, What Culture, Loudwire, and Kerrang. Finally, his three books, On Track Jethro Tull, On Track Opeth, and On Track Dream Theater, were published by Sonic Bound Publishing. In his spare time, he likes to yell at strangers about how awful Genesis were in the 1980s. With friends like that, who needs enemies? Jordan, great to see you. Welcome to the show. It's great to be in your presence.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been a long time coming, and I couldn't be happier to be here and happier to make your acquaintance in a more official, formal, live way.
Well, let's jump right into it because I definitely have a ton of things to talk to you about, all of them good. But I think as any good story, you have to start at the beginning. We, of course, met as fellow columnists at an outlet that we both were involved with for quite a long time. So we were colleagues. We supported, occasionally collaborated. So we were not only kind of co-writers and features editors, columnists, we were really kind of in a mutually support system. I'd say our obvious enduring bond is our mutual obsession with music in general, prog rock in particular. But if I were to say, what is it about you two that you guys have in common, that besides the fact that you're writers and culture enthusiasts? I think we're both driven by trying to explain initially to ourselves and then to others how music and art work and why these things matter. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, even that's what I always try to do with my writing and whenever I do podcasts and even teaching is to try to kind of break down how all forms of art and entertainment, but especially music, can be so much deeper. Like it's not just entertainment. It's not something you just put on the background necessarily. Like there's so much depth to it.
Yeah.
There's music therapy. Like there's so much power to music that I think people do appreciate, but sometimes don't always, especially maybe with like younger generations. Like that makes me feel old. Of like what can this like? This is not just something you throw on. You don't just download the single. Like understand the album and what does this mean and how can this connect to you?
Yeah. And I think there's a trajectory many of us that have done criticism follow, which is, of course, at first and foremost, we're fans. Then we become obsessives and we spend a decent amount of time trying to figure out, like, why do we care about this so much? And then how do we talk about it? How do we talk about it intelligently? And how do we bring that enthusiasm to others? I certainly can trace my own trajectory along those lines, but talk to us a little bit about when you first began figuring out you knew you loved music, you knew you loved talking about it, maybe even writing about it. But as you started to understand how to put these feelings on the page and how that grew into what you are still becoming today.
Oh yeah. Well, I would say like kind of the writing and the music part started around the same time when I entered high school. I was reading a lot. I was reading Chuck Palahniuk, who wrote Fight Club, is his most famous work still. I don't know how he feels about it, but that is still what he's known for. Like Bret Easton Ellis, things like that. And I remember like the first week of high school, the first month, it being in, I grew up like listening to a lot of music in my parents' basement with my dad, listening to like the Beatles and the Paul is Dead thing and tracing like mirrors on Sergeant and all that.
Yeah.
And I just distinctly remember like that September freshman year of high school listening to King Crimson and Yes. And I would say really like the most mind blowing change is when my dad put on an album called Thick as a Brick. And I had no concept of a song could be this long. It could be split in halves. It can have reprisals. And I'm in the, I think, minority of fans who, kind of side note, I think A Passion Play is by far the greatest Jeff Toll album. I don't understand why people hate that. But anyway, so discovering like the prog rock and like I didn't know music could be this. I always thought Phil Collins was the Disney guy. I always thought Peter Gabriel was the Sledgehammer guy, and nothing. I like that stuff too.
Yeah.
But like hearing Foxtrot and thinking like that's him, that's them, just blew my mind. And then with reading, so I started like writing fiction and poetry, but also really wanting to write about music. I
Mhm.
didn't really start writing about music until I got to college at Rider University, where I still teach. And I remember like the first week as a freshman saying, I want to spread the word about these albums. I want to talk about this music. And I kind of had to fight for it because some of it wasn't super like relevant. Like, why would I talk about The Lamb Lies Down decades later? But I remember like I said, I want to write about Opeth's Ghost Reveries. I want to write about Spock's Beard Snow because these albums like blew my mind. So
Yeah.
that's really where it kind of all started is like writing fiction and poetry in those classes. But as soon as I got to writer, I said I have to write about music and other things. But I said I have to like get into this journalism. I have to start making these contacts. I have to work my way up and start getting connections and maybe like getting things sent to me and kind of just building myself up as a legitimate music critic as soon
Yeah.
as I can. And I did.
Yeah. And we'll get back to how that all works and
Yeah.
the slow, steady process. I would say one of the things, and I admire your writing, as you know,
Thank you.
on every level, both the breadth and depth of the topics that you
Oh,
tackle.
likewise. Yeah.
I would say thank you. I would say I would describe your sensibility as combining an obvious genuineness with a generosity to the topic at hand. You're insatiable, which is always good for a reader. I think it's also, of course, good for the writer because it keeps a pipeline that never gets filled. But you've got the key ingredient, I think, that's important for any effective writer, and that's curiosity. It's
Thank
clear that you have widened your horizons because your interests have widened and your passions have deepened, and then concurrently you've developed your and honed your skills. So it's this kind of combination of you go deep, you go wide, but you're always trying to write in the service of the topic at hand, like respectful of the musician or the author, but you're really trying to serve up something that the reader can learn from. And I think that's what separates, you know, the contemporary, not very deep, very SEO friendly, very clickbaity. You're more of an old school soul, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think one of the differences, as you're talking, is making me think that I think it's important for writers and journalists and critics in any sense to remember you are not their public relations. You are not here to sell the product. You're here to evaluate the product. And for better or worse, I kind of made, to whatever degree, made a reputation, but I pride myself on being honest with my criticism. So it doesn't matter if I know the artist, it doesn't matter. And there's been a few cases where, like, the artist, I said, like, I thought we were friends or I knew you liked my stuff, and I'm surprised by your take on this. Like, two examples that kind of come to my mind are Neil Morse, who started Spock's Beard and went solo. And I do love his stuff. Don't get me wrong. I love Spock's Beard. I love a lot of Neil Morse's solo stuff.
Yeah.
But I even asked him to his face a couple years ago, do you realize you kind of make the same album every time? And people I've had people say, like, how dare you say that? And,
Right.
and I'll say, like, I have to be honest. The other person that I think was a little more personal was a man named Arjen Lucanson, who has a project called Arion. I'm saying that correctly. That I love. Don't get me. I love Arion,
Hmm.
but his last album, Transitus, I was not big on it. It killed me to like be negative, but I had to be negative.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a bit. He doesn't hate me, but I said like I knew you would see this,
Yeah.
but my job is to be honest, not to people please, not to like get you to like me more and things. And I think going along with that too, like you don't want to talk about yourself. Like when I teach my students this about academic writing, and I like to think that my writing has an academic layer to it, an academic structure without being so scholarly that it's inaccessible. Like I'm not
Yeah.
trying to impress anybody,
Yeah.
but I want to, follow an academic structure of a thesis and all that.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's important. And I always say, like, it's not about you. So you're giving your thoughts, but you're stating it as fact. You're not saying, I think this album is good. You're saying this album is good. And it's
Right.
not about, I woke up today and wanted to listen to this album. It's here's like the history, here's what they're trying to do with this album, and here's it coming into it.
Right.
And why is it good? Why is it not good? Is it a mixture of both?
Yeah.
So I really, yeah, just pride myself on kind of trying to be articulate, but trying to just be honest and think like I'm not trying to sell the product. I don't work for
Right.
them.
Yeah.
Here's honestly what I think. And if you think I'm completely wrong, at the end of the day, it's just a music review.
That's right.
Like
Yeah.
that's the interesting thing about it.
Yeah, no, your honesty, I think that's how one cultivates a readership, period, because that authenticity is easy to spot, and the opposite when people are taking shortcuts, that's easy to discern. I would say a very valuable lesson for me pretty early on, and this applied to both more academic writing, but certainly criticism of art, especially books, movies, and music, is I found pretty quickly that it's actually much more difficult to write an effective bad review than it is to
Yeah.
write a good review because you want to be fair. You want to justify your position. If you go beneath the surface with either the social media 20 words or less rah rah or thumbs down, that's easy. And it's actually very
Yeah.
satisfying to write an in-depth piece that makes a case why this isn't up to snuff. Is a big responsibility, I feel.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure to make sure you're selling the argument, you're accounting for what not only what you expected, but what the artist is trying to do and what the fan base may want. And that's, as we know, like that's always the question that artists in any kind of medium have to think about is should I make something that my fans are going to like and is part of my brand, or should I be an artist and say, you know what, I want to do this now, and if people don't like it, that's fair. Um, and I think it's just hard to kind of combine those things. Like I've said to a lot of people talking about writing, there's a big difference between saying this is bad and saying I don't like it. Like you can like, you know what I mean? Like I don't like this, but this isn't a bad movie or video game or album. I can see where you're going. It's not for me, but for what it's
Yeah.
trying to do, it's successful. I think it was Roger Ebert who said that you can't judge all movies the same way. Like, is it trying to do the same thing as that kind of movie or that album? No. So for what it's trying to do, is it successful? Yes or no, but could it have been more, or is this for me? Is a different question.
Yeah. That's beautifully stated. I think you just articulated very succinctly and powerfully like the essence of how one approaches responsible criticism. And it never hurts to invoke the great Roger Ebert,
Yeah.
R.I.P. Um, I let's so that's I would love to talk. We got a lot of ground to cover, and I want to hear more about like your formative influences, but getting down to some real brass tacks. I'm going to pay you a compliment, but it's in the service of making a rather depressing observation, which is, um, you know, our mutual trajectories. I think most would agree. It used to be, and whether this was 20 years ago, 40 years ago, if you could get published, you could get paid. Rough, generally speaking, as everyone knows, that ship sailed decades ago. Um, I think it's fair to say that the decreased paths to remuneration have separated the lifers from the pretenders, and that does its own service. But getting into how one makes a living, I would say, looking at you, I would also describe you, in addition to the things I've already said, as indefatigable. You're very productive. which is not to imply this comes easily to you so much as you work hard at it, you do the work, which is its own lesson for people to be inspired by. But I would say, this is my opinion, it saddens me a bit that someone like you that's written for a variety of reputable outlets, somebody with a writer with half your talent and a tenth of your ambition probably would have been making a fairly comfortable living a quarter century, 30 years ago. This is the times that we're in.
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about how you have and continue to navigate, what I would say is a rapidly changing and not necessarily for the better, at least in terms of how a writer gets paid, this landscape of never been easier to get your work out there. It's never been more difficult to get paid for it.
That's a great point. Yeah. Because the internet, it's easier to just get out there, but because it's so, and now with like AI and chat GPT and stuff, do we even need to exist anymore? Yes. But do people think that?
Right.
It could be difficult. Yeah. And I won't name the outlet, but there was a place that I'm pretty sure if they were open to it, I would be full time. Like there's nobody else I don't think that they would pick, but there's no opportunity because of budget and things. And that is, yeah, just the reality. Um, something I've tried to learn is, because like a lot of creative people, I've kind of self-diagnosed myself with imposter syndrome. I think everybody who has ambition pretty much has imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've tried to kind of reconcile is just be comfortable with what you have and stop trying to like spread out more and get these accolades and try to impress people. Like you have what you have
Yeah.
and fight for it and keep it. But yeah, it's difficult because on one hand, you want to know your value. You
Yeah.
want to know like what I'm doing is worth more than what you're offering me, but also I'm glad you're offering me something. And like, does that mean I've made it and things? And it can be difficult. I think it's just true for any kind of like passion project is you have to recognize that this may not be able to pay the bills entirely. And it's getting harder and harder. And there's more and more, I don't want to say competition because we should support each other in the community,
Yeah.
but there's more and more people trying to do it. So you have to kind of etch out like a specialized field and kind of be known for certain things.
Yeah.
But to your earlier point too, I remember for the very brief time I wrote for Paste, and I would think, they didn't pay me, but it is what it is. I remember somebody kind of saying, like, how much do I get paid for this? I want to make sure I'm getting like X amount for a music review for Paste magazine. And it was somebody who had never written before. So I kind of have those mixed feelings of
Yeah.
eventually when you establish yourself, you should get paid for it.
Yeah.
But and I'm not naming any outlets,
Yeah.
but if an outlet is upfront of saying this is a volunteer thing, we're volunteers here.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, all right, well, I want to do this for free.
Yeah.
And you know who I'm talking about. And I always had an issue with that of like they're upfront saying we're not paying. And if you're okay with
Right.
that, great. If not, great. So I always defend that.
Yeah.
But I remember saying to this person at Pace, like, who are you?
Yeah.
And I didn't mean that in any kind of egotistical sense.
Yeah.
But I do kind of believe that you have to pay your dues. You do have to make a name for yourself. You do have to make your byline worth something in and of itself to a degree
Yeah.
before you can just say, I want to write for Rolling Stone right out of college and pay me $100 or $200. Like it certainly doesn't work like that now.
Right.
So
Right.
it's kind of like paying your dues and understanding you have to build up your credibility and your
Yeah.
name,
Yeah.
but also not undervaluing that. Okay, I have done these things.
Yeah.
I am worth a certain amount just to have, not only my name there. And again, I'm not trying to sound like an egotistical or anything, but like
Yeah.
my attention, my dedication. Like you're not just paying me for this review, you're paying me for all of the years of experience I have
That's right.
getting to this point.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
it's a balance of it.
So I think what that leads me to is, and I think this is important, especially for maybe younger writers to hear, is that when I hear these topics discussed, especially in academic circles, all too often it kind of stops at the shoreline of like, yeah, so things are hopeless, the media's screwed, and AI is going to ruin everything. It's like, all right, that's a very defeatist attitude. I think what you and I can really unravel a little bit today is the new reality, the new normal, however tenuous, is that things that used to be taken for granted are now on the author, which means the
Yeah.
whole hustle is everything mentality is definitely the new normal. But this is not in vain, right? I'll take you again for example. through these publications over time, you accrue credibility, like you mentioned, you accrue a resume, and that leads to connections, it leads to opportunities, and your discipline, among other things, has led to book deals and some teaching gigs. So there is a certain sense of this is what's required. It's very unlikely that any writer today is going to write that breakout feature or that breakout book and like, I'm a writer now, right? I think there's an element of the long game
Yeah.
is, like I said earlier, is what's going to separate the wannabes from the people that are in this for the long haul.
Yeah, exactly. And especially during COVID and post COVID, where so many outlets said like we're on a hiring freeze or we're on a freelance freeze. Like that's that's the worst thing you can read as a freelance writer. It's like, we'll get back to you later, but for right now we're not using freelancers. It's
Yeah.
like, oh no, is this gone? And what I found is it's not gone. What I found is you just have to be the squeaky wheel, like not annoying people, but
Right.
you do have to sell yourself. You do have to say, hey, I know you said that you're not like taking any pitches right now, but I just wanted to remind you that, I kind of exist. And here's some things I think I might be able to do. That's one of the big
Yeah.
lessons I've learned, and kind of like changing my approach is it's no longer me saying, hi, I love music. I love your site. Can I write for you? It's more so of me saying, here's who I am. And here's some ideas I have that you may want to publish and you may want me to write. So like it's more of what can I do for you?
Yeah.
And here's my qualifications. Um, but yeah, you have to kind of do the hustle. You have to be comfortable with the hustle. And to a certain extent, that's the satisfaction, I think, is finally getting a pitch accepted, finally getting that one like dream publication to say, yeah, okay, we'll give you a shot. And
Yeah.
maybe it's your one and done, maybe you're kind of a regular, but it is the changing landscape. But I do agree, like that's why among many reasons, that's why I don't like going on X, because it's so, if you just see like other music writers who are like were full time and they got fired and the company got bought, it is
Yeah.
like the most depressing, nihilistic. Like, what's the point of us even doing this anymore?
Yeah.
And I don't. I mean, I've been very fortunate. Like, I'm not saying like everyone will have the luck that we've had, but I
Mhm.
don't think it's that doom and gloom in my experience. Like maybe every so often a place needs to take a break. Like one place I've been at for a while, they did take a break for a bit, but now all of a sudden I got an email from the editor saying, "All right, we want to restart this like series with you and somebody else, and like we're going to do this band this month." And I'm so grateful to be back in the loop.
That's great.
So it's not like all or nothing, and that's something I have to kind of take comfort with myself, with my own, again, like anxieties. Is just
Sure.
because you're not writing for this place now
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're gone. Doesn't mean like it wasn't for anything. Like you may come back, and who knows?
Well, true that, we're all one phone
Yeah.
call or email away from a really wonderful opportunity. I'm curious if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about how you broke into the book writing business. I'm imagining
Oh
that
yeah.
the volumes of criticism you had done didn't hurt the prospects of you being either considered for the pitch or being approached, or was it a bit of both?
Um, from what I remember, if I, it's an interesting story if I'm remembering it correctly, which was that I was looking for a publisher for fiction and poetry. I was thinking like I have some fiction stories, I have some poetry, I maybe have enough to do a chapbook for each, but I'd rather just kind of combine it and make it multi genre, and just kind of say here's everything I've got so far. And I think somebody recommended Sonic Bond Publishing, and I said, oh well, that's like music. That's not really what I'm looking for, but let me reach out.
Mhm.
And then so I did reach out, and I realized that the editor, Steven, also writes for Prog. He's also in the loop, so that kind of helped. I think we were both involved with a magazine that's no longer around called Rock Society, or Progression. I think may still be around. I think it was Rock Society. So I
Okay.
just reached out and said like, "Hi, Steven, I'm Jordan Blum. This is what I do. I love progressive music. I've been writing for these places. I know your name from a few things. What do you have that you're looking for?" And he said, "Oh, well, I'm looking for somebody to write a book on King Crimson and Jethro Tull." And I said, "Well, I like both bands. I know both bands, but Jethro Tull is 10 times more important to me. And not say like they're better, but
Yep.
Jethro Tull is closer to me for sure. I would
Right.
love to write this book about Jethro Tull." And it wasn't so much that I had to pitch it because it was part of a series. So it's kind of that idea of they bring in writers to do what this series does.
Right.
And I said, I've done some clippings on Jethro Tull. I've interviewed Ian Anderson a couple times. I grew up as I said, Thick as a Brick of Passion Play was all I listened to
Yep.
in freshman year of high school. That was like every day.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it sounds good. It sounds like you are the right guy. Here's what we want. Here's what we'll pay. Here's, the due date. Here's like an example. And I said, all right. And it was one of the like scariest acceptance, like most exciting but scariest like acceptances I've ever had of I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm doing this. And what if I fail? And what if I can't do it? And
Yep.
luckily he had me back for two more. And I could do another one if I wanted. It's just the timing of it.
Sure. Sure. I want to high five you, like Jordan. What people are getting now is what I already know about you, but your humility and genuine modesty. I think, but I
Right.
so I want to celebrate that. But I also I think that that is really important for any writer or artist watching this at any level. The reality is, the people that want to do this work seriously, there's seldom that moment where a particular opportunity or offer comes and all the problems are solved and it's rinse, wash, repeat, and you cash the checks, whether
Yeah.
it's someone like Jordan or myself, or I've read in any number of interviews, and I've commented on this often, but I always get a special combination of like unbelievable refreshing reprieve and depressing dejection when I read someone like a Philip Roth or a Stephen King say, it's every time I got to figure it out all over again. I don't know if I'm going to do it right. The reality being, it's hard work, and to do it well, we're our own harshest critics most of the
Oh
time.
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm hypercritical of myself. Even when I teach and I kind of, give examples of my writing and here's what I'm doing and here's how I'm setting up my argument and all. But I'm kind of like self-effacing in that sense too. It's like, yeah, well, maybe I was too wordy here. And I honestly like, I don't know, I have a weird relationship with it all because of like the internet and Reddit. And one of my new fascinations is parasocial relationships.
Hmm.
And there's the pushback. Um, because I don't know. I mean, again, not naming any names of publications, but I don't remember if you were there or not when a certain review went up for a certain Latin pop artist, and I got hate, and everyone got hate for just talking about it.
Hmm.
And it was just kind of that fascination of like people putting you down, and you realize that there's eyes on you. People are going to like create Reddit threads about you, and you got to have kind of thick skin about it.
Right.
Um, but you do want to believe in yourself too, and you want to. It does take, I think, for me at least, a little bit of time to say like, no, I know what I'm doing. I am good at this. Like people have told me,
Right.
even with like writing press releases, I'm trying to like branch out more and more into press releases, which is really fun. It's exhausting, but it's amazing to get these opportunities. But it was
Yeah.
only recently that I even raised my price because it was like I don't know if people would pay me this much to do it. Am I worth that much? And it
Yeah.
wasn't that much. Um, but people said, "Oh yeah, it would be, that's nothing for us, for somebody, for what you've done." And I was like, "Oh, okay. If I tested the waters, and if you tell me that this is what you think of me, then I'm not going to tell you you're wrong."
Indeed.
It's the lesson.
Let the market, right? Whatever the market will
Yeah.
bear. Well, you lead me to a question I was going to ask, so I'm going to jump ahead to it, which is I'd love you to elaborate a little more on you. I feel obliged when we talk about things like brand, you almost have to say brand, but there is it's very real, and as it relates to both writers,
Mhm.
critics, and readership, we are all brand managers. We're all managing our own brands for the most part. How have you found the process of cultivating your brand? Which, and by that, I mean, you could take that in any number of directions, but I specifically mean one does have to make oneself available with a website or an online media presence. How have you found that process? Has it gotten easier? Are there pros and cons? And how do you feel about brand?
Um, I think it could be a good thing and a bad thing because it plays into your reputation, and it's the idea of like people know you, and you think of like the most celebrated music critics, like Lester Bangs, for example, and
Yep.
like that name has meaning, and if you know their style, you know their likes, getting like or again going back to like Roger Ebert, like getting a thumbs up from somebody that you trust, and you know what they're into, you know what they're not into,
Yep.
that can carry more weight because like you can tell that it maybe was a little bit more difficult to get their approval. Like they really would have been honest with you, and if they say this is great, they mean it.
Right.
So I think in that sense, it's really good. And I mean, I did have a website. I just didn't like keep up with it, but I do have business cards, and I'm always again, I'm always just trying to be humble. I'm like, hey, this is what I do. Here's a card, if you want to reach out to me or something. But there's been a few times where people have recognized me at a concert or at an event that I'm going to later this month called Prog Stock in New Jersey. I've had some people like look at me like I'm a celebrity almost. Like that's you're Jordan Blum. Like, yeah, I'm just here, which is like so humbling and surreal.
Yeah.
I think the downside of that, though, and I'm sure we've all experienced this to a degree, is getting kind of typecast as being like that guy. So like I'm the prog guy wherever I go, and I'm glad to be. I think I am thought of as like a voice in the progressive rock and metal criticism scene. I'm not like writing for the biggest music magazines in a general sense. I'm not interviewing like Taylor Swift. I don't want to.
Right.
But within like what we within that circle,
Yeah.
I think my name has some kind of recognition, which is amazing to me. But
Yep.
it's also that idea that people are surprised when I listen to other music and or like I love like No Doubt. I grew up listening to No Doubt. I adore a Linkin Park album called A Thousand Suns, which people tend to think is their worst. I think that album is brilliant and like just all sorts of things. Like, yeah, it's not progressive. Why do I have to, Kendrick Lamar? I love like Childish Gambino, Run the Jewels, like Tori
Sure.
Amos, all sorts of things. So I think
Yep.
that could be the downside is you get kind of pigeonholed into this and typecast and
Yep.
not. I mean, I've done so much stuff outside of progressive music, but still, I feel like sometimes people look at me and think like, "Oh, you're the prog guy." It's like, well, I yes, but no,
Right.
because in order to write about like anything, you have to know what's out there beyond that.
Right.
So you have to be like open to it and dislike some things maybe, but you like some things, and it better informs what this is doing, not only within the genre it's in, but in the musical landscape in general. Is this pulling in other genres that you'd only know about if you get out of your little, box and listen to that stuff?
Right. Right. Well, I had mentioned earlier your curiosity, and you have mentioned a couple of times, your at least in your formative years, you were very interested in fiction. Talk a bit about as you've done more and more music writing, do you still have a passion for fiction? Are you still doing fiction? And how is that relationship between the critic and the creative writer?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I would have to say that that's taken like a back seat. Between like teaching, writing, and also I founded and then I run a literary journal called the Bookends Review. So that's really my exposure to like fiction and poetry and creative writing these days is almost 100% running the journal, looking at what my editors vote on, publishing it. I haven't written creatively in years, which
Right.
I do want to get back to and publish some things. Um, but I do think it's kind of influenced it because what I was writing, and this is so like cheesy, but I don't know, it's what you can do. But I would
Right.
sneak in like references to music into the writing. So I had like one short story where a guy has a surreal like fever dream where a little girl turns into Phil Collins. I remember once it was like very weird. I remember writing some story where they went to a movie called Starless and Bible Black. So I like having those kind of Easter eggs and the cross pollination.
Yeah.
And of course, like loving poetry, loving fiction with progressive music, you can appreciate the concepts. You can appreciate that Wordsworth, came up with "I wandered lonely as a cloud," and "Child is father of the man," which is like Brian Wilson's "Smile." So in that sense, it's kind of even though I don't do the writing and the poetry as much as I'd like to,
Hmm.
it does help me appreciate when music incorporates poetry and incorporates storytelling, kind of playing along with the rules of the genre in a musical form.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, Jordan. There's zero competition amongst us, nothing but camaraderie and solidarity. But there is a part of me that's a little bit relieved because if you had said, "Oh, I've written a couple of novels," I would have been like, "Do you ever sleep? And what drugs do I need to be on to be as productive as you?" So at least it's somewhat refreshing for the mere mortals to hear that no, he does not actually have the time and the bandwidth to do it all. But man, with what you have on your plate, you're busy enough, and I'm sure you'll return to that. But you mentioned the
Yeah,
teaching, and I don't want to shortchange that because I do think I'd love you to talk a little bit about the ways in which teaching obviously is a complement to the writing, but
yeah.
also it's a big commitment in terms of time and just energy. Talk a little bit about your roles as writer dash teacher and what both give and take to each other.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, it gives me the opportunity to kind of practice what I preach, and not just say like, here's how you write an essay, and here's what a thesis is, and here's how incorporate sources
Yeah.
with a signal phrase and things. I can kind of pull up things I've written and say, yeah, this is not like quite, I don't have in-text citations. I don't have a works cited page. I have hyperlinks. But do you notice how I'm still introducing the source? I'm giving them context. Do you notice how I still have a topic sentence for this paragraph? And also, it's very rare that any of my students have heard of any of the bands I've written about. The
Right.
only the only person I ever bring up as like a friend, but we know each other online, like we're Facebook friends, is the drummer of Cohen and Cambria, Josh. We talk about like horror movies sometimes. He's a really humble, good guy. Like we talk sometimes.
Hmm.
But if very rarely have I ever spoken to anybody they've heard of, which is fine.
Right.
But it does kind of let me say, like, I'm not just telling you these rules. Let me show you how I do it. And you can tell me as my students, do you think I'm not doing this the best? Like, what would you say about my writing?
Right.
Because I try to tell them there's no such thing as perfect writing. It's not math. It's like, and I bring up examples of poetry and fiction that is celebrated that I don't like, and I'm not right, I'm not wrong.
Yep.
But I think it does help me kind of establish that ethos with them of I'm not just telling you these things. I'm not just some teacher, and I'm not that much now. I guess I'm twice their age, which is crazy, but
Right.
like here's how I do it. And I write academically about like the Dark Knight Rises. I'm not writing these scholarly pieces. And I do think that helps them relate to me a bit more, that I do know about video games and YouTubers. And I've even said to them sometimes, like, do you think I go home and study like a dictionary or I correct my friend's syntax? Like I'm hanging out with people. Like
Right.
I'm not this like specter that is the teacher. Like I'm just, a guy talking to you about writing and trying to help you. So I think it helps in that sense. But yeah, it can be very, very difficult to balance
Yeah.
the two. Like even this week, I have like lists that I've been working on, but I also have essays I need to grade, and I just haven't gotten to them. And I think it does take a little bit. We have to give ourselves a break and say like it's okay that you are tired. It's okay that you did enough today.
Right.
And I've even had like because I try to grade essays within a week of when they're submitted, and I've had students say like, "Oh, we have teachers who don't grade essays for 2 months," and I'll say, "I don't understand that because you need feedback to get better."
Right.
So it's kind of like learning to give yourself kind of like the forgiveness to say you did enough today. You're not trying to like impress the world. Like just be happy that today is done, and as the saying goes, tomorrow you will get done what you can get done, and
Right.
it will wait. And if you need more time for a writing assignment, which is one of the benefits too, is you build your like reputation. I think that's one of the things I've established is that I am dependable. I'm not like flaky. If you give me an assignment, maybe I need an extra day to do it, but I'm going to do it.
Right.
And I think editors really appreciate like knowing that they can reach out to you, that you're going to turn in what they told you to turn in. And I try to bring that to the students too.
Yeah.
And I'll say like some of my editors, especially Joe at Loudwire, he's the editor in chief now, Joe DeVita. He and like we've known each other for a couple of years. He was a staff writer when I just got hired. And we had a mutual friend, Nikki, who was with Napalm Records, I think, and now she's just with Breaking the Law PR, which is cool. But he and I just started talking, just kind of like two guys writing about metal, and like, oh, you're staff, I'm a freelancer, any advice, that kind of thing. And we talk about all sorts of things. And then he just kind of became editor in chief of Loudwire, and the woman who was Bob is now editorial director, I think.
Mm.
So he and I will talk on Slack about like all sorts of random things. But at the end of the day, he gives me an assignment. I'm going to like tell him I need another day for this. I'm going to get his permission. And I try to tell my students that like as much as we can be friends and we are, I don't want you to be afraid of me.
Right.
No matter how close you are and friendly you are with your boss, they're your boss. So you have to
Yeah.
say, by the way, can I have more time for this? You have to show that respect no matter how informal you are, like in other situations. And I think that's something I've kind of crossed over between writing and teaching, is that like lesson that you have to respect the hierarchy, you have to be responsible.
Being reliable,
Yeah,
absolutely. That's gold. You just dropped some gold on us. And I would say, it's oft repeated, but talent is not enough. Tenacity, reliability, these are all things that are critical, especially in a really competitive landscape. So I think you're dropping some good knowledge for younger people. And I would say, just listening to you, enjoying hearing you talk, Jordan, I've made my own kind of connection, which is it does not surprise me to hear you talk about the burden of teaching what a teacher, an effective teacher will do to be relatable to the students is going that extra mile to give them examples that they can resonate with and that will make sense to them. I think that's what you do with your reviews and the writing you do. So again, I think that that generosity of going the extra mile and having that integrity is what makes for good writing, what makes for good teaching, and good things happen. So cheers to you for that. I'm curious because you're younger than me. You can at least still remember your undergrad days. When we talk about AI and the internet and social media, are there any kind of high level things you've noticed that are drastically different in the students in terms of their writing or thinking, their reliability versus say when you were their age, not that long ago?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so just for everybody listening and watching, I'll be 37 in December, which is hard for me to believe because I still kind of feel like I'm an 18-year-old. Like with my students, I don't want to think like I'm literally twice your age now, thereabout. I mean, in general, what I've talked to colleagues about is just I think students today are just more fragile. They're less assertive. They're coddled, I think, too, by their parents, by the system,
Yeah.
which is kind of like a whole other topic. But I remember being an undergrad, and you're nervous, but I remember saying I have to write to my teacher and say I'm going to miss class today, or can I have more time for like you have to be your own kind of advocate.
Yeah.
Whereas now I think students are just coddled and there's so many like excuses. Well, kids are dealing with so much today, COVID, and the world is scary. And it's like, yeah, but it's
Yeah.
like every generation has anxiety. Every generation, to a degree, people have
Yeah.
depression. You have to be open about it. You have to talk about it. And that's something else I tell them too, is I don't go into detail, but I say I understand how the scariest thing in the world is a blank Word document. And as much as I've been doing this, like having a press release to write, having an album anniversary to write is scary. Like, where do I start? What if this isn't good? I said,
Yeah.
like, I'm not trying to scare them, but I say, like, it doesn't go away when you get published. It's kind of the imposter syndrome, but it's kind of just
Yeah.
I want to do the best job possible.
Yeah.
But with like AI, it's something. One of my colleagues said this to me last year, and I think he's not to generalize all of it,
Hmm.
but he said these aren't scholars anymore. These are customers. They want the A. They're paying for the class. They don't want to do the work. They want the quick and easy. And again,
Right.
that's not true for all. I have so many wonderful students who want to be better writers, better thinkers. They love the class. And
Sure.
inevitably, you're going to have a few people whose parents are making them go to college and I just give me the A. And I'm
Right.
paying you to give me an A. It's like, no, that's one of the worst things you can ever say to a teacher is I'm paying you to give me an A. No, you're not.
Right.
I get
Right.
paid the same no matter what happens with you, honestly, but I love what I do.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like I try to get them to realize that as much as it is more work to do the research and the writing and the thinking, it is so much easier to go to ChatGPT and give it a prompt. I said, and maybe they think I'm trying to sell them something, but I can say there's honestly very few things that feel more rewarding and more satisfying than looking at the clock and thinking, all right, I've been working on this for 12 hours. It's 7 o'clock now. I'm kind of sweaty. Maybe I need to take a shower, but I did it. I'm done.
Yeah.
And I said, there's no greater satisfaction than having an outline of like paragraph one quotes and arrows and just crumbling it up. I said, that is such a satisfying feeling. And you're cheating yourselves if you just have AI do this for you.
That's right. I think that's it in a nutshell. Even if it sounds superficial or too trite, you're cheating yourself if you're not
Yeah.
putting in the time, and you're certainly not giving yourself skills that you will need at some point when the ugly real world is awaiting you. So good on you for combining that kind of erudition with the encouragement. Um,
Yeah.
what I was afraid of, we were going to fly through this, but I'm not letting you go yet. I'd be very remiss if we didn't do a rapid fire, which I didn't prepare you for. So
Okay.
understand that you will be able to revise these, but as of 6:59 Eastern time on October 2nd, I'm going to riff off some questions and I want an immediate response. What is the best Jethro Tull album and why is it a passion play?
Oh God. Okay. So passion. Okay. So Thick as a Brick, which came out in 1972. To me, I've always referred to it as a passion play junior. It is incredible. It is simpler. It is less like challenging. it's more accessible, but a passion play is deeper. It's more experimental. It's got, I mean, the second half of a passion play, like that whole last, it has some of the greatest melodies I've ever heard, like one after another. Um, it's more theoretical because it's not just a fictional story of a kid writing a poem. It's about like a man dying and the train to hell. And maybe I'm missing up some of the details, but it's just way more academic. It's way more philosophical. It's way more erudite. It's not as like easy to get into, but once you do, it's way more rewarding. And it's, to me, it's absolutely a better album than Thick as a Brick. The Thick as a Brick is incredible too. So
You and I have always bonded on that 100%. Okay, best prog album ever.
Passion Play might be up. It's up there. Passion Play is definitely up there. Um, Maybe an album called Doomsday Afternoon by Fido is up there. Maybe Dream Theater's Metropolis Part Two is up there. A Norwegian band that very like far too people have heard of called Gazpacho has an album called Night, which is a 50-minute like section sequence into loneliness that is one of the most incredible things I've ever heard. Ayreon's The Human Equation is their best album, and that's one of the best like prog metal albums ever. Genesis Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is up there. Um, it's hard. I mean, some of the Deer Hunter albums, Beardfish albums. There's so much. Spock Spirit Snow is up there for me.
Very only one of those answers I would have expected, which is the Genesis. So thank you for that. That's exactly what we expect from you. That level of depth. And I'll make some notes because I haven't heard a couple of those.
Okay.
Your all-time favorite album. You can't say Passion Play.
Oh God. I have to give two in terms of like what affected me the most. One is an album called In Absentia by Porcupine Tree, which just changed my entire life.
Yeah.
And when I got to meet Steven Wilson and talk to him and have him like even recognize me is like mind blowing. So In
Yes.
Absentia. And then I would say the album that had the greatest like impact on me is an album called Weather Systems by Anathema. Because without getting into too much like detail, I'd come out of a 5-year relationship, and I actually wrote like a song by song essay series for the website about this. And I just gone back to where she lived, and we grew up, not grew up together, but we spent so much time there.
Yeah.
So driving back on like I-95 from where she lived, putting on Weather Systems by Anathema, and it freaked me out because it captured so articulately what I was feeling of like I love you, but I'm like just to the point where I parked the car when it was over and I was almost shaking of like this just got it. And I even wrote to Vincent Kavanaugh afterward and said like I don't know how you did it, but this is exactly what I'm feeling. So it's not necessarily the greatest album ever made, but in terms of albums that like I would not be who I am, I would say like those two are definitely up there.
More than acceptable answer. Beautiful answer. Greatly appreciated. All right. What about book and movie?
Oh God, the greatest book ever.
Or your favorite? Doesn't have to be the greatest.
Catcher in the Rye is up there. Stephen King's The Stand, I think, is incredible. For some reason, there's a book. I forget what the author's name is. The Life and Death of Sophie Stark that I really liked. I forget what her name is. There's that one. And then favorite movie is easy as Donnie Darko. I don't know what that says about me, but Donnie Darko, and again, like watching being a teenager,
Yeah.
kind of that whole like Holden Caulfield mentality of like the world's bullshit, girlfriends don't like me, all that stuff.
Yeah.
To the point where I refuse to watch the sequel. And like I don't mean that as a joke. Like I am never watching Starco. It pisses me off that it exists. I'm never watching.
Fair enough. Two final questions.
Yeah.
Can you name your ideal writing project? What are we working toward? What are you waiting for? Or what is your big ambition?
Well, I think if I did another Sonic Bond book, if I did another one of these on tracks,
Yep.
it would either be for Devin Townsend, who I will always wave the flag is a genius. Like that word gets thrown around a lot when we praise directors and musicians and actors, but I do think Devin Townsend, if you don't know him, strapping young lad Canadian, I think he is a musical genius. So I'd love to do that. Um, and I always kind of categorize bands as like the best at what they do. So, for example, like Opeth, the kind of like melodic death metal. There's In Flames, there's Amorphous, but Opeth is the best at what they do. And
Yeah.
kind of another field is a band called Between the Buried and Me. There's so many bands that kind of do what BT Band do. They are the best at it. I would say the Parallax 2 is maybe the greatest progressive metal album ever too. So I would love to either do like an album by album dive, or maybe like a 33 and a third about Devin Townsend, or Between the Buried and Me, or kind of my two like goals of getting into those discographies.
Right on, right on. And I think the best parting shot, understanding that we're going to have to revisit this conversation at some point, because believe it or not, I feel like we adequately scratched the surface, but I'm going to need more. So to be continued.
Yeah.
But for an aspiring writer, I'm thinking a starry-eyed prog lover, not unlike you and me, and as teenagers or a recent grad. What is some advice you'd give? I think we have weaved in advice throughout this, but specifically someone that would say, "Hey, Jordan, man, I read your stuff and I want to do what you do. How do I get started?" What would you offer a younger aspiring writer?
Okay. I would say first, know study as much as you can about the field and about the genre. Because one of the things we all learn doing this is people always disagree. So, if you say, as I've said, like I've done a list of the history of progressive metal in 21 albums, I'm doing the prog rock in 20 albums. And no matter which albums you pick, you should have included this one or that one. So you have to kind of get comfortable with that. But I would say before you start writing, know the material, know the history, know how you feel, know what influenced what to a certain degree. You have to be an expert. There's so many opinions.
Yeah.
Um, and then just start doing it. I mean, it's an obvious answer, but just start writing. Again, I literally started writing for my college newspaper. It was for free, obviously. It was just to kind of get the bylines, to get some clippings.
Yep.
And then, I mean, really what I did was I just started reaching out to different publications. The first one I ever wrote for, I think, was called Delusions of Adequacy, which I don't think they're around anymore. Though I still get emails for them, like pitches. I'm like, you are 15 years too late.
Yeah.
Another one was called Sea of Tranquility. I feel like a lot of prog writers get started at Sea of Tranquility.
Okay.
And Pete Pardo is great. But that's what I'd say is like, know what you love, know what you want to write about.
Yeah.
Because, again, like nothing against people who follow like Taylor Swift as an example, nothing against her. But there are so many people who will write about the popular artist and kind of get the bylines in the biggest places and like write for Rolling Stone. And okay. So
Yeah.
I would say decide if you want to be kind of like more famous, maybe, and maybe more like paid better in that sense. But are you doing that at the expense of maybe selling out to a degree?
Yeah.
Or would you rather kind of do what I like to think I've done, which is written about big bands, written for some big websites and all that, but I don't think I've ever betrayed my tastes. I'm always honest. I've always said like if I don't want to write about this, I'm not going to.
Yeah.
So I think you have to figure out like what do I want out of this? Like I love writing about music. What can I do? Do I want to specialize? Do I want to kind of broaden? Again, nothing against people who do write about popular things. It's not inherently a bad thing. It's just
Right.
what are you going for? If you love it, then go for it.
Yeah.
But that's what I'd say is like know some of the history, know some of the interactions, and then just start writing and just get some feedback and learn. And it's not going to be great. Like there's that famous quote. I think it's Ernest Hemingway. All first drafts are shit, and I tell my students that too.
Yeah.
And not in the sense like you're a bad writer, but just it's a first draft. Get it out there. Get the feedback. Do you sound too much like a fanboy? Is it too like personal? Can you
Right.
have objectivity? Can you sound like an expert and you have the passion coming through the writing, but it's not so biased that it's just, again, like a press release for them. Like you're not writing a press release, you're writing a review, you're writing a
Yeah.
criticism.
Yeah.
And then just be patient, build yourself up, welcome feedback, realize that you don't have to take all feedback. Realize that no matter what you put out there, some people will love it, some people will bash it. And my response, as you I'm sure have seen, my response to every piece of every like negative comment I've ever seen on anything is thanks for reading. Literally, thanks for reading. You gave me the click, you gave me the attention.
Right.
Thanks for reading.
Yeah.
I'm still going to do what I do, and if you don't like it, thanks for reading.
There
And
it
then
is.
just building yourself up.
Yep. Yep. I think the key takeaway there is great advice for anyone doing anything in life is you've got to develop the knowledge, but you've got to do it from the heart. I can think
Yeah.
of very few fellow writers that I can name check off the top of my head and say, who's someone that always follows their passion and is honest and has integrity? And it's you. So, Jordan, so appreciative of you taking the time out of your genuinely busy schedule. It's been wonderful to chat with you. I think we have done an okay job illustrating why you are a writer that a lot of people covering a lot of different genres and interests should be following. So if this picks up some new followers for you, my work here is done. But I encourage all of you watching, check him out. He's easy to find online because he writes a lot and he writes very well. Jordan, greatly appreciated. And folks, thanks for checking us out on Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest at seanmurphy.net. And a reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity, and we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. So get involved, support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. And for today, your homework, go check out Jordan Blum. Jordan, be well, and we will talk to you soon, my friend.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care. Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, we are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.